Chapter 3: The Weasley Family Gathering. The next day, Harry received an invitation to a dinner party at the Weasleys' house. He decided to bring his godson Teddy along with him, hoping that the little boy would have a good time with the Weasley children. As they walked into the burrow, they were greeted by Mrs. Weasley, who welcomed them warmly. "Harry, dear, it's so good to see you," Mrs. Weasley exclaimed, hugging him tightly. "And Teddy, look how big you've gotten." Teddy grinned, showing off his missing front teeth. "Hi, Mrs. Weasley. I'm 5 now." Mrs. Weasley laughed. "You certainly are. Come on in, everyone's waiting for you." "Thank you, Mrs. Weasley," Harry said, stepping into the warm and inviting burrow. He looked around and saw that the place was bustling with activity. He spotted Hermione and Ron standing by the fireplace, chatting with Ginny and George. There were plates of food and drinks set out on the table, and the smell of roast beef and gravy filled the air. Teddy's hair suddenly turned bright red, causing Harry to laugh. "Looks like Teddy's excited to be here too," Harry said, ruffling the boy's hair. "Yeah, my hair changes color when I'm excited or happy," Teddy said, grinning. "Isn't it wonderful?" Mrs. Weasley said, beaming at Teddy. He inherited his mother's metamorphomagus abilities. Hermione approached them, looking slightly flustered. "Harry, Teddy, it's so good to see you both. I hope you don't mind, but Mr. Weasley invited my parents to this dinner party as well, and I'm a bit nervous about how they'll react to everything." "Don't worry, Hermione," Harry said, patting her on the back. "Your parents will love it here. And if they have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them." "Thanks, Harry," Hermione said, smiling gratefully. "I just want everything to go smoothly." As they settled down at the dinner table, there was a sudden commotion at the entrance. Harry turned around to see Bill Weasley and his wife, Fleur, walking in with their 4-year-old daughter, Victoire, in tow. "Bill! Fleur!" Harry exclaimed, getting up to greet them. "It's been so long since we've seen each other." "It certainly has," Bill said, shaking Harry's hand. "We've been busy with work and the kids." Fleur leaned in to kiss Harry's cheek, and Teddy looked up at Victoire in awe. "Wow, your hair is so pretty," he said, staring at her curly blonde locks. Everyone at the table laughed, and Hermione turned to Mrs. Weasley. "This is going to be a fun night," she whispered, and Mrs. Weasley nodded in agreement. As they settled around the dinner table, Mr. Weasley leaned forward, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Now, I've always been fascinated by the Muggle world. Tell me, what exactly do you do for a living?" Hermione's parents exchanged a confused look. "We're both dentists," Mrs. Granger replied. "Dentists?" Mr. Weasley exclaimed, his eyes widening. "Fascinating. And how do you go about fixing teeth without magic?" Hermione stifled a laugh as her parents exchanged a bewildered look. "We use tools and techniques that are specific to dentistry," Mr. Granger explained patiently. "But surely you must use some kind of magic to ease the pain?" Mr. Weasley persisted. "No, we use anesthetics," Mrs. Granger replied with a smile. "Well, I must say, it all sounds very interesting," Mr. Weasley said with a nod. "I've always been fascinated by the Muggle world. Did you know that I once got stuck in a telephone box for 3 hours trying to figure out how to make a call?" Hermione and Teddy burst out laughing, while Mrs. Granger looked at him with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. "Really?" she said with a smile. "Yes, indeed," Mr. Weasley replied with a grin. "But I must say, I've come a long way since then. I've even learned how to use a computer." Hermione's parents exchanged a look of mutual surprise. A computer? That's wonderful! Mrs. Granger exclaimed. Yes, indeed. It's amazing what you can do with technology these days, Mr. Weasley replied with a grin. As the laughter subsided, the conversation turned to more serious matters. Speaking of mysteries, Mr. Weasley said, have you heard about the disappearances in the Forbidden Forest? It's been happening for the past few weeks. Hermione's parents looked concerned, while Harry's mind immediately went to his conversations with Hagrid about strange sounds coming from the forest. I've heard a bit about it, Harry said cautiously. Mr. Weasley nodded. The Ministry is looking into it, but we haven't found any leads yet. It's quite worrying. I'm sure you'll get to the bottom of it, Hermione said, trying to sound optimistic. Let's hope so, Mrs. Weasley said, looking at her husband. Maybe Harry can help, Teddy piped up. He's really good at solving mysteries. Harry smiled at his godson. Thanks, Teddy. I'll see what I can do. Mr. Weasley looked thoughtful. Actually, Harry, I was hoping to speak with you about this in private. I have some ideas, but I don't want to alarm everyone. Harry nodded, and of them made their way to a quiet corner of the room. Hermione, Ron, and Ginny followed them, sensing that something important was about to be discussed. Mr. Weasley hesitated for a moment before speaking. As you know, the Ministry has been dealing with some disturbing events lately, including those disappearances in the Forbidden Forest. I believe that this could be related to some ancient magic that has been disturbed. Harry nodded in agreement. I remember Hagrid telling me about some strange sounds he heard coming from the Forbidden Forest a few weeks ago. Maybe we should talk to him. Hagrid may have some information about what's going on. He's always been fascinated by the more dangerous creatures in the forest. The group exchanged concerned glances. Harry spoke up. Do you have any leads on what this magic could be or who could be behind it? Mr. Weasley shook his head. Not yet. But we did recently apprehend a group of dark wizards in the forest who were performing some very dark magic. One of them mentioned something about Marauders, but we haven't been able to make sense of it. Hermione furrowed her brow. Marauders? That's a strange thing to mention in that context. Ron rubbed his chin. But what could this have to do with the Marauders? They were just a group of Hogwarts students who like to cause mischief, right? Ginny piped up. Maybe they stumbled upon some kind of ancient magic while they were pulling their pranks. We know they were always sneaking around the castle and grounds. Mr. Weasley looked impressed. That's an interesting theory, Ginny. It's possible that they uncovered something they shouldn't have. The group fell into a thoughtful silence, considering the possibilities. Harry broke the silence. Well, we won't know anything for sure until we investigate further. Hermione nodded in agreement. And I can do some research on ancient magic. Maybe we can find some clues about what's happening. The others nodded in agreement, and they began to make a plan for their next steps in the investigation. Mr. Weasley looked relieved. That would be wonderful. The Ministry is at a loss about what to do. We've even had to arrest a group of people found practicing dark magic in the forest. One of them mentioned something about Marauders, but we couldn't get any more information out of them. Mowgli called out to everyone to come back to the dinner table as the food was ready. They all made their way back to the table, and as they sat down, Harry noticed that Hermione still looked worried. He leaned in and whispered, "Don't worry, we'll figure this out." Hermione smiled weakly in response, still deep in thought. Then Teddy piped up, "Uncle Harry, can you tell me more about the Marauders?" Harry grinned, glad for the change of subject. Of course, Teddy. The Marauders were a group of 4 friends who attended Hogwarts together: my dad, James Potter, Sirius Black, your dad, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew. They were all in Gryffindor and loved causing mischief around the school. They even created the Marauders map, which was a magical map of Hogwarts that showed the location of everyone in the castle, Ron added. Teddy's eyes widened in amazement. Wow! That's so cool! Can you show it to me, Uncle Harry? I'm sorry, Teddy, Harry said, shaking his head. I lost the map years ago. Ginny piped in, but they also used it to help others. Like when my brother Ron and Harry needed it to sneak into Hogsmeade. Ron grinned. Yeah, and we would have been caught without it. Hermione nodded, but it was really dangerous to create that kind of map. If someone else got their hands on it, they could use it for bad things. Teddy's eyes lit up with understanding. Like the Death Eaters. Exactly, Harry said, giving him a proud smile. Bill's daughter looked confused. But if they were so great, why don't we know more about them? Ron shrugged. They were a bit of a secret society. They didn't want everyone to know what they were up to. Ginny added, but they left a legacy behind them. They were brave and loyal friends to each other. Teddy chimed in, and my dad was a part of the Marauders. He was James Potter's best friend. Hermione nodded, yes, and they were all in. Suddenly, Peter's name came up in the conversation. Harry's expression darkened as he remembered the betrayal of his former friend. Peter Pettigrew was also a part of their group. He was the one who betrayed James and Lily to Voldemort. There was a moment of silence as everyone remembered the tragic events of that night. Then, Mr. Weasley cleared his throat. Well, let's not dwell on the past. We have a good meal waiting for us. The conversation turned to lighter topics, and George even pulled out a few of his latest Weasley Wizard Wheezes products to share with everyone. As they enjoyed their meal and laughed together, the mystery of the missing people in the Forbidden Forest still weighed on their minds. But for now, they were happy to be surrounded by friends and family, reminiscing about old times and making new memories. Hello viewers! That's the end of Chapter 3 in our ongoing story about Harry, Teddy, and their friends at the Weasley dinner party. We hope you enjoyed this chapter as much as we did writing it. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the bell icon to get notified about our future videos.